Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. So I rise to speak to the House today on behalf of the Business and Trade Select Committee on our 6th report, a roadmap for the EU reset. And in so doing, Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope you'll forgive me for using this moment to share my profound thanks to the members of the committee who are both diligent and hard-working. And from our earliest days together as a committee, it was very clear to all of us that our relationship with the European Union had been trapped in the logic of the past, and while not all of that past was bitter, the present was clearly unsatisfactory, and the future could be richer if we collectively chose to reset that relationship with more ambition. That, we sensed, was also the analysis of His Majesty's government, and so we asked ourselves what could be done in order to move forward this relationship, not distracted by some kind of fantasy, but informed with a real, hard-headed and pragmatic focus. And so we travelled to Brussels, to Belfast and indeed to Geneva. We listened to businesses, to trade unions, to diplomats, to officials in the European Commission, and we looked at border posts, at trade barriers and, I'm afraid to say, an awful lot of lost opportunities. We asked one simple question: how can we make these arrangements better? We didn't seek to reopen old wounds, we sought to open new doors, and what surprised us, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that it was not difficult to find 21 different ways in which our relationship with the European Union could be reset in a way that would make our country richer. Steps that would support our security, deepen our energy ties, and cut the red tape which is throttling trade with the EU. These were not abstract aspirations. They were grounded, practical, deliverable, and they were supported by an overwhelming coalition of business groups that we met with. In short, the proposals that we presented were backed by business because they were good for business and therefore good for our country. We divided the work into three ambitions: opportunities to defend our prosperity, second, to defend and advance energy cooperation, and third, to cut the red tape strangling trade at the border. On security, we proposed a bold new partnership, a joint defence industrial policy, a framework for protecting critical national infrastructure, and stronger coordination to tackle economic crime. We called for closer cooperation at the World Trade Organization, including UK participation in the new dispute resolution procedures, because a rules-based order is not just idealism. For us, it is insurance. On energy, we saw something extraordinary, an opportunity to unlock the potential of the North Sea as the world's biggest green energy power station. But that vision demanded that we come together with the EU to create a single carbon border adjustment mechanism and to connect again electricity trading and emissions trading. That could add up to a faster and cheaper path to net zero for both us and our European neighbours. Now, on trade, we welcomed the government's ambition for a deep SPS agreement and indeed a fair fisheries deal, but we pressed for some specifics: mutual recognition of alternative economic operator schemes, bilateral waivers for safety and security declarations, cooperation around ro-ro ferries, rejoining the PEM Convention, mutual recognition of conformity assessments, and a long-term roadmap for compatible regulation. On services, we urged His Majesty's government to strike a new data adequacy agreement, pursue deeper cooperation on financial services, ensure UK access to Horizon Europe FP10, sort out a new roadmap for mutual recognition of professional qualifications, reduce the barriers for touring artists, and implement a visa-capped, number-based, age-capped youth experience scheme. Now, we published our draft report to test it, but the response, Madam Deputy Speaker, was overwhelming. Support levels of between 80 and 90% for the measures that we proposed. Businesses said this is what we need because it will unlock growth, create jobs and raise wages. Now, on Monday, Madam Deputy Speaker, we saw some signs that the government had listened. We were glad to see progress on security, on defence, on electricity trading and on emissions alignment. There was a new Security and Defence Pact. There was useful language on critical national infrastructure. There was a welcome step towards joining electricity and carbon markets together. But we have to say that there was much that was left in the to-do pile. There was actually no ironclad commitment to a shared defence industrial policy. There was, in my view, too little progress on law enforcement cooperation. There was silence on WTO cooperation, although I acknowledge that may come in the trade strategy when that is published. We thought there could have been more in financial services cooperation, on data adequacy and on mutual recognition of conformity assessments. And of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a deal without a date. This was a handshake but not yet a contract. Yet it was an important start. After what I think have been years of drift and division, this was the first time since Brexit that collectively we have the chance to stop digging ditches of grievance and actually start rebuilding some bridges of cooperation. So this was a step forward, but it was only a step. And what comes next must be really clear. We must now have a timetable for drawing up, finalising and implementing these agreements. We think that there should be action to take forward the unfinished business which we've set out in this report. And crucially, Madam Deputy Speaker, we think that there should be a bigger role for Parliament, because Parliament should not be a bystander while our future is forged. So let's not retreat into nostalgia. Let's work pragmatically together in the national interest, because, Madam Deputy Speaker, that is how futures are really built. When we are at our best in this Parliament, we choose to lead, and that is exactly what this relationship now needs. So I commend this report to the House and indeed this call to action.
Sonia Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that consistency and clarity are exactly what business require to grow and thrive? This is why the Government should consider this report's recommendation to consult with the industry's recommendation about Pan-Europe Mediterranean Convention. PEM membership could support tariff-free trade, simplified rules on origin, reduce trade barriers for key sectors such as automotive manufacturing, chemicals and food production. By joining PEM, British businesses would expand its preferential market access to 25 countries, thereby strengthening supply chains and boosting the competitiveness of British exporters.
Liam Byrne.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend has made this point repeatedly in the deliberations that we have had, and what has been especially welcome on our committee is the way that she consistently brings the perspective of local businesses in her constituency in Dudley, the home of the Industrial Revolution, as indeed we all know. And she is right to say that, subject to a consultation in particular around the implications for the EV car industry, rejoining the PEM Convention could deliver us some rules of origin which could radically cut red tape for many of the businesses in her constituency, many of the businesses across our country, and frankly it would lower costs at a time that is much needed.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman and his committee for their extensive piece of work and the report that he has presented today. He mentioned the wide range of different asks that the UK government had that he recommended that they pursue. Would he agree with me that it is disappointing that of the things that the UK government wanted to achieve, the movement for touring artists and the participation in EU defence spending are left unagreed, while the UK government seems to have agreed and traded one of our most valuable parts of the negotiation, which is the access to our fishing grounds?
Well, I'm very grateful for that point, and she, like me, will know that although fisheries and the fishing industry constitutes quite a small part of our economy, about 0.04% of GDP, for many coastal communities, this is an absolutely vital industry. Nevertheless, we felt, or certainly I felt, that the prize of an SPS agreement, which could be worth a huge boost, according to Aston University, of up to £3 to £4 billion a year, plus the ability for shellfish in particular as exports to go into the European market, was potentially a prize that was worth having. But she is right to say that probably the biggest concern that many of us should have was around defence industrial cooperation. We cannot defend Europe in the way that we can, in the way that we should. We cannot spend the increases in defence spending in the way that we should, unless we reorganise Europeans' fragmented defence industrial base. We cannot be stronger together unless we build that shared defence base together. And I very much hope that this is something on which we will hear an awful lot more progress in the Strategic Defence Review and indeed the National Security Review when those strategies are presented to Parliament before the summer recess.
Gregor Poynton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A report covered how we could help agri-food businesses export into the EU, and it was delighted to see Scottish Salmon and NFU Scotland come out in support of the deal this week. Therefore, does my right friend agree with me that it was baffling to see the SNP stand with reform and the Tories in opposition to the deal?
Well, the consensus that we received when we published the draft of our report was overwhelming. The measures that we proposed were backed by an enormous majority of business groups across the country, including groups across Scotland. What I think business really saw is a very practical, a very hard-headed, a very common-sense set of recommendations that I think should not only be supported by the front bench, but should be supported by those in public life across our country.
Charlie Maynard.
Thank you, Deputy Madam Speaker, and thank you, Chair, for your leadership and hard work on the committee. I very much welcome the moves this week, and I think they're moving in the right direction, and they are a set of aspirational statements of intent which are going in the right direction. Great. But does the Chair agree that we should focus on the big stuff? So in terms of big stuff, proportionality, India, the deal there gets 0.1% of GDP by 2040. The American pact gets us back to a worse position than we were 6 months ago, and therefore, really, Europe is where it's at. Europe represents 45% of our trade versus 12% in the US, and the 21 statements we set out were very beneficial, of which maybe 5 or 6 have been hit. But really, the key thing is trying to go for the big stuff, such as being back inside the customs union. That would make a big difference.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the report could not have been as well written or as strong and robust in its recommendations without the input of the Honourable Member, and we are very grateful for the hard work that he put into getting this report right. It wasn't a proposal, as he knows, perhaps because it wouldn't necessarily have swept the committee in unanimity to agree a bespoke customs union. But what was very striking is that the measures that were set out in this would have been significant enough to offset the economic damage that we will suffer because of the tariffs introduced by President Trump. He is absolutely right to say that in economic matters it is always wise to focus on the big numbers, and the big numbers in trade come from a better, closer, stronger relationship with the European Union.
Chris Bloor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate the Right Honourable Member for his report and his stewardship of the committee. My inbox was full of emails from local businesses in Redditch, relieved that after years of hesitation and no progress moving forward, we're finally in a dialogue with the EU about improving access to the EU for businesses in my constituency. Would he agree with me, as in the report, by continuously speaking with the EU, we can finally start getting rid of the red tape that many on the pro-Brexit side promise to businesses like those in Redditch, and we can finally get proper access to the markets that world-leading companies in Redditch really should be able to access freely.
Well, my honourable friend has consistently been a very strong voice for the business community in Redditch since he has joined us in this House, and he is absolutely right to say that what has for a long time been lacking in the relationship with the European Union is the kinetic energy that is required to drive any bureaucracy forward. We have a number of working groups that were set up because of the TCA, and I think in a cross-party spirit, I would say it is important to note that the mood in Brussels significantly changed under the last Prime Minister and the progress that was made in the Windsor framework. There was definitely a mood change, but unless you invest significant amounts of political attention and energy, then things will not move forward, and there is still a long way to go. We've set out where some of that progress still needs to come in this report, but ultimately politics is what changes things, and I hope the political energy that went into Monday is something that can now be sustained for the future.
John Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the Right Honourable Gentleman. His adroit chairmanship of this committee has been tremendous. It's allowed a lot of cross-party working, which has been really refreshing and very, very good. It is a moment of regret. Unfortunately, we did flag up the danger to fragile coastal communities that a multi-year deal on fishing could damage them badly, and the 12-year deal is beyond anything anybody imagined, and that will hammer fragile communities right across Britain, but particularly in Scotland, and that is unfortunate. Would the Right Honourable Gentleman agree with me that the achieving an SPS deal must be balanced with the other deals that are coming down the tracks, India, America, and so forth, that we must have due care, and I'm sure the committee will look at this. We must look to make sure that the Brexit freedoms that allow us to strike those deals elsewhere in the world are not damaged.
The Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right, and as we were composing this report for the House today, over the last few weeks, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Member was consistently somebody who underlined the risks that coastal communities confront if the deal goes the wrong way, and we are all incredibly grateful to him for the voice that he provided. He's absolutely right to say that we have obviously got to make sure that we enshrine certain standards that allow us to draw closer to Europe without compromising the alliances that are already coming into place and those that we still need to strike in order to restore our role as the great free trading nation on this planet. And so the way in which the government is seeking to tessellate this agreement with the trade deal with the United States, with our leadership of CPTPP, with the deal with India, and with the deals that are still to come, with the Gulf Cooperation Council, with Korea, with Switzerland, is something that needs to be very, very carefully balanced. It looks like the government has just about got it right, but I know that he, like me, will want our committee to keep an extremely close eye on this as the trade talks proceed.
James Naish.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for the excellent report, which is very much rooted in pragmatism and practical steps, which I know that my constituents welcome. But he has there highlighted a gap, as he sees it, a first step, but there's a lot more to do. Will his committee undertake to monitoring that gap between what the government has committed to and where he would like the government to be? And will he therefore, he and his committee, continue to make recommendations to the government?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to point this out, and I suppose the good news for the Minister is that he's now got the scrutiny framework in front of him that the committee will use to judge the progress that he is making over the course of this Parliament. But there is a moment that is still to come for this Parliament, because at some point, we're not quite sure when, but at some point there will need to be scrubbed treaties that are laid here in this House, and then this House enjoys the grand total of 21 days during the CRAG process with which to scrutinise it. That is not very long. The committee therefore has decided this week that we will open inquiries on the EU deal, on India and on the United States. We will seek to hold hearings on each of those trade deals before the summer so that the House can be as well informed as possible when the CRAG process begins, so that we can really zero in on the issues that are at stake for our constituents.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Chair of the Business and Trade Committee for this thorough set of proposals, and especially the call for a greater role for Parliament. The committee RAG-rated its 20 proposals and marked as green the UK-EU Security Pact. And yet the Prime Minister's spokesman admitted, quote, "This is a first step towards UK participation in Europe's defence investment programme," and went on that it merely opens the door towards joint procurement. Would the committee chair acknowledge how much more there is to do before this amounts to a shared defence industrial base?
Yes, the honourable member is absolutely right. I mean, he knows, because of the extraordinary record of service that he brings to this House, that there is an immense amount of work that we still need to do to conquer the inefficiencies and fragmentation of the European defence industrial base. We cannot spend the money that we are proposing to spend on defence wisely unless we change the way that we procure military equipment, both providing, on the one hand, greater certainty and long-term contracts to defence suppliers, but also helping ensure that we are building that innovative ecosystem of funding to help smaller, innovative, nimble, agile suppliers of weaponry come forward in the way that they can in order to ensure that the lessons that we've learned on the battlefields of Ukraine do actually help inform our military strategy in the future. And I think if there is one lesson we have learned, is that any warfighting capability depends on the strength of our defence industrial base. And quite obviously, today's defence industrial base in Europe is not in the right place. And we, together with our partners, have got to work hard on that. And I hope that the Strategic Defence Review will set out some practical steps for how we are going to do that together with our allies in Europe.
Dr. Andrew Murison.
Deputy Speaker, congratulate the Right Honourable Gentleman on his statement and for the work of his committee. Clearly, renewable energy is an important part of our relationship with the European Union. What opportunity did his committee have to examine that and the trade of energy between the UK and the European Union, particularly in the light of the possibility in the very near future of an interconnector between Morocco and the UK, by way of the UK-Morocco Power Project or X-Links. He may know that if the UK doesn't greenlight this in the near future, then other European countries certainly will.
Well, the Honourable Member is absolutely right to say that Morocco is a country that we should be working more closely with. X-Links is an exciting proposal. As a stable, long-term partner to Europe, Morocco is a country with which we have a shared interest in the future. But I think the perspective that we brought to this question was how do we ensure a faster, cheaper, less risky path to net zero for us and for Europe. And what was very striking was the evidence that we heard from many in the electricity and energy sectors about almost the thoughtless way that we had been disconnected from electricity trading schemes. What I suppose really worried us in the near term was that if we have, as we do, different carbon prices in the UK and Europe, then there was a real risk that if Europe introduced a carbon border adjustment mechanism, and we did a little bit later on, there was almost going to be a tariff wall created because of those different carbon prices. So we think that the government has really done well in seizing that win-win, but that is not to take anything away from the logic and force of his remarks that ultimately we're going to need several big infrastructure initiatives like this if we are to do what we all know needs to be done in this country, which is to drive down industrial electricity prices.